Welcome back to the Locker Room podcast number 61. As usual, I have Stevie, Poacher and Daniel St. Ledger here today. We're going to review the All-Ireland football quarterfinals. Stevie, we'll start with you. Thanks for coming on the show, lads. We'll start with you. I know you were very, very active there on Sunday night on Twitter, but we'll start with you. Kerry, Dublin, Galway and Kerry. Now, you actually predicted all of these teams to get into the semi-finals. So there were no huge surprises. But what for you were the main talking points for the weekend games?
Listen, Joe, I suppose there was nothing really to talk about in the Dublin game outside of the fact that Daniel has alluded to in the past that without Con O'Callaghan, Dublin at the present moment in time are looking very ordinary. And I think on Saturday night that sort of confirmed everyone's suspicions, that without King Kong, they seem to be a good side, but a side that are vulnerable and a side that can be beaten. Derry Clare, I suppose that the outcome, the result as such, didn't surprise too many, but maybe the manner of the win, with Derry scoring so many goals so early and the game being so weak in the first half. I think one of the things, obviously, that Derry had honed in on was very, very identifiable early in the game, and that was the Clare kick out, Joe. They went after it aggressively. They went after it hard. Gallagher has obviously brought in a huge level of conditioning into this group. You can see in the way that they play, the way they attack, how they transition. They've got serious athleticism in their team. And look, they've good footballers too, Joe. Shane McGuigan was absolutely outstanding again. Rogers and McKaig. If Clare decided to give up the kickouts, but you've got to remember as well, as good a man marker as McKaig and Rogers are, they're as equally as good at travelling with the ball, and with Loughney were really in their plum and during their time of winning Ulster titles and getting All-Ireland finals. McKaig and Rogers were the driving force of that team and the heartbeat of that side, And Derry have some really good players. Conor Glass come back in there as well this year, obviously. And I think Sunday was probably the first time, Joe, outside of the attritional Ulster affair, Saturday, outside of the attritional Ulster affair, that Glass has probably found a bit of freedom. I think in Ulster, people are so aware of him that he's maybe tagged or he's maybe targeted or he's maybe man marked. But on Sunday or Saturday against Clare, he sort of had the freedom of the park and you've seen what he's capable of doing. He's a fine athlete and a fine footballer. But look, Sunday's first game was absolutely probably how a lot of people had predicted. It was going to be cat and cagey early on. It was a slow burner to start with, very tactical, long bouts of possession for both teams. But once the game started to get a bit frantic in the second half, it had everything. But look, from a Galway perspective, they'll probably be disappointed, Joe, in the manner of their collapse, because there was a very similar collapse in the Connacht final against Roscommon as well, when Roscommon sort of threw the kitchen sink at them and went at them and pressed kickouts and decided to go route one, which is interesting. Galway struggled. Now, I called it in this show, I think, last month that I thought they wouldn't contest an All-Ireland final with Gleeson in goals. I think he's a very, very poor keeper. They have an issue in nets. They've tried Power in there as well. I think they've used 3 keepers this year already. So it wouldn't surprise me if he's dropped for the semi-final, Joe. It honestly wouldn't surprise me. But look, hats off to Armagh. They showed a bit of resilience. They come back into the game with a couple of fortuitous goals as well. But they could have and probably should have won the game in extra time. And I suppose the big debate in that game is, why did Armagh drop off the kick out when they went a point up? But it's very easy to say that when you're watching from the outside. When you're on the sideline and that ball goes over the bar and you look at the clock and there's 60 seconds left, you're probably going to be squealing for your team to get back and get that, So, and I remember being involved in games in the past, one that Daniel was involved in as well, against Down, actually. I remember during our time at Carlow, and it was a key game. And I remember, in injury time, 6 minutes in injury time, scoring the equaliser and dropping off the kick out, and Down got a free kick from that, and got the winner. But so it's very, very easy in the heat of the moment to sort of to say, oh, why did they not press? But you can understand they're a point up and they're obviously trying to protect the lead. But look, the last game went as scripted. Joe, I think Mayo have been very, very poor this year. They've been very vulnerable. They were very open in the Connacht game against Galway. They were extremely exposed against Kildare. In fact, Kildare probably feel they left the game behind them, and it was no surprise that a sort of a what you would probably call a 60-70% carry got over the line by 7 or 8 points.
And Daniel, just on the wider point, there were over 70,000 people at Croke Park on the Sunday. The atmosphere was unreal. The entertainment value given by the Galway and Armagh players, especially, despite a lot of the negativity recently that we've heard in the media and even from some politicians. I mean, the effort levels and commitment, especially, the penalty shootouts, you have to hold your hands up to these two sets of players.
You do, Joe. Yeah, it was really good. And I found the political element absolutely ridiculous on Monday morning. I can't get my head around it. I mean, of all the problems we have at the moment, like Christ above. But anyway, separate issue. But on Sunday, and I put a lot of this down to Galway and Armagh. I think a lot of the fanfare was down to that game. It was the first time, I'd say, in about 10 years it felt like real championship stuff, where you're just like, I have absolutely no idea what's going to happen. And I thought it was absolutely fantastic. Obviously, that one incident at the end aside, I'll take that away and just talk about what actually occurred on the field. And I thought it was brilliant. It had moments of naivety. It had moments of unbelievable quality. Doggedness. It had a sending off. It just had everything. It was absolute quality and badly needed, I think, because the other three games probably didn't really live up to a whole lot. But I think it's no coincidence that game was the tightest, and obviously both have flaws tactically and all the rest, but their strength and conditioning are very, very, very similar places, and I thought they matched up really well. I thought when you looked at all the other three games, the Derry and Clare, Derry just looked like they were on a different planet, and Stevie mentioned their conditioning, and it's not even that they're sloggers and will run for the 70 minutes, but it's that 50, 60, 70 meter burst, especially on transition. It's incredible. Like, there's times you look across the field when they're coming out of their 45 and they've got 5-6 lads with heads down and just a flat out sprint to the far 45, and it's really, really impressive, and that looks to be really specific sort of coaching, which is obviously paying dividends. But I thought Dublin and Cork, again, similar. It's probably Cork actually did okay. I thought Dublin were a bit toothless. They did what they had to do, but there was a mismatch there, and that's the reality. Dublin could just get their score so much easier. And I thought Mayo just looked exhausted, and every time they kicked it wide, every time they had a turnover, it just sucked the energy. And I think, the funny thing, I think Mayo had 41% conversion rate, and for all the gaps that were in the team, what was the difference? It was, you're looking at David Clifford probably on one side of the field and no shooting forward really that was on fire for Mayo, and I've never came across a championship at the moment. Like, we always talk about not relying on one person, and it's always a group, it's a team. The structure and the format of the team supersedes any individual, but I've never come across anything where it's, if David Clifford has gone for Kerry, massive dent in they've huge problems. If Con O'Callaghan specifically is gone for Dublin, that's a massive dent in their attack. Galway and Derry probably a little bit less so. But I think Derry were opposition accounted for. Derry were just really impressive, and they looked like they had a point to prove, and that is a dangerous place. And every time I've seen them so far, I've been kind of waiting for them to not slip up, but waiting for a little bit of reality to bite. And every time I see them, there's something new. They give me something different. Like, so that the Ulster final, they had no problem turning that into an absolute shit show, to call it what it was. They had no problem taking the sting out of the game and playing really, really slowly, methodically. Then you come up to Croke Park and they made a concerted attempt to say, right, we're going after this game, And I thought putting Rogers in the middle of the field, they highlighted O'Neill from Clare and they kind of went after him a little bit in his mobility. Chrissy McCaig put Keelan Sexton on the back foot from the get-go, and the ruthlessness in front of goal. That was a bit of a two fingers to everyone who was saying that Will Derry's system, all the rest, And they're a dangerous team, a really dangerous team. And I put it this way, I wouldn't be amazed to see them in an All-Ireland final.
Yeah, I think on the previous podcast, you were a little bit unsure about whether or not they were All-Ireland contenders, but now you're more convinced, it seems.
Yeah, I think so. Like, and again, look, this is all very dependent on what with Kerry and Dublin, who gets a fit group of players. Really, I still think they're probably not at that level when both of those teams are humming, but neither of those teams have been humming all year. Kildare gave a little glimpse of the Kildare game for Dublin gave a little glimpse of what they were capable of. But again, that's with Conor Callan, with a fit James McCarthy. They looked like they had real intent. But, you know, that was easy pickings for Dublin that day. And Kerry the same. Kerry have stuttered consistently through kind of a good league campaign, fair enough. But like through Munster, they're, you know, all right. And I thought against Mayo, if Mayo had anything about them, Kerry were there for the taking. And it was a bit like the Tyrone semi-final last year, where first half Kerry were dominating and they just silly little turnovers, over elaboration, one little dummy solo too much, rather than just getting it over the bar, doing the simple things, you know. And there's an element of that in the first half. And obviously second half they pulled away, but I think that was more to Mayo, just their energies being sapped from that first 15 in the second half.
Okay, well, we'll go through these games a bit more methodically, lads. But before we do that, just a quick word from our sponsors. Ripped for supporting the podcast. Rip's online platform provides coaches with everything they need to optimize athlete performance. Head over to rip.app for more information. Okay, Stevie, we'll just start with that Armagh-Galway game. Galway winning penalties. Armagh started really well. Galway came back into it. They led by 6. And then Armagh get the 2 late goals. Obviously forced it to extra time. We know what happened in the penalty shootout. Ultimately, the game was a draw. But who, in your view, was the better team and why?
Joe, listen, I think maybe, look, Galway, for me, were probably marginally the better side on Sunday past. You know, look, I think it's no secret, probably a lot of people now, Joe, that you know, probably haven't seen them up closely. I suppose I've been in a fortunate situation that I've watched them 3 or 4 times over the last number of years and studied them very closely last year. And outside of the big 3, as you would call it, you know, the 3 that are renowned is Comer and Conroy and Walsh. You know, everyone seems to point the finger at these 3, like, but you know, Rob Finnerty in the corner forward, Joe, is as good a forward as there is out there at the minute on form. You know, he's a very, very elusive player. You know, they've got Killian McDade, who can float between 9 and 11, alternate with Matthew Tierney as well. You know, 2 fine footballers. But they have a few dogs as well, Joe, and I mean that with the greatest respect. You know, warriors like the likes of Kelly there, who's the captain, you know, an absolute competitor of the highest order, you know, and will put the head in where many wouldn't put the boot. And then you've got ball playing halfbacks as well, even the likes of Malloy from Corofin, who's a couple of Club All-Ireland medals under his collar. Thought he was outstanding on Sunday, you know, and likes of Johnny Heaney, who'll put a shift in for you and will dog it out. And even options coming off the bench there as well, Joe. You know, like this is a massive county. Galway's a massive county. You know, they've a huge tradition in both football and hurling. You know, over the last number of years, they've been very successful underage teams as well. Their under 21 team from a number of years ago, the likes of Matthew Tierney's crowd, you know, they're coming through now and starting to show a bit of maturity. But for me, Joe, there wasn't an awful lot tactically wrong with what Armagh done. You know, I think the sending off was obviously a big moment as well. It made them have to chase the game a little bit more. But look, it's the Croke Park factor too, Joe. You know, Armagh probably haven't played an awful lot of football at Croke Park over the last number of years. I know they did this year in the National League, but it does make a difference, you know, and obviously, you know, Galway haven't been there last year for the Connacht final as well against Mayo, and then there this year for the National League final as well against Roscommon would have obviously have helped them, you know. But I do feel, Joe, look, it's a team that's probably, in my honest opinion, Galway are a team that are very, very underestimated, I think, by a lot of people, because they don't really see past the likes of Walsh and Conroy. Conroy, who in particular was quite quiet on Sunday, in my opinion. But one of the biggest things for me, Joe, is the kick out, Gleeson. And listen, Derry had their own problem as well. You know, with Lynch and goals and give away a couple of sort of what you would call high risk sort of kick outs that ended up, you know, in scores for Clare. So that element of the semi-final is going to be very intriguing to see, you know, what both teams will do with their respective goalkeepers, you know. But it's, look, you couldn't really point the finger, Joe, at anything really tactically on Sunday that Armagh didn't do well. I think it was just a matter of Galway on the day. It just had better players outside of their big guns.
Is that what it is, Daniel? Do Galway have better attackers? I mean, if you're looking at some of the stats there, both teams had 25 shots from play. Galway score 18, Armagh score 15. Is it the better quality up top, Galway? Is that why? Obviously, it was a draw, but
Yeah, I thought when Armagh were in the ascendancy in the first 15 minutes, they probably didn't go for the squeeze, let's say, the way Derry did. Like Charlie O'Gorns had a good goal chance. Even I think Nugent had a really good goal chance. He could have popped off to Greg McKaig. Like they were really big chances. And yes, they weren't clear cut, and they got a point out of one of them. But like a goal at that stage in the game is you're turned into 1-3 to a point or whatever it was at the time, and that kind of changes the dynamic a little bit. That it makes Galway have to come out of their shell a little bit, but Galway were able to grind their way into the game. You could see slow for the first maybe 15 minutes, they were slow to get back into their set, but eventually they kind of got there. And I don't like. There's very little between the two teams. I mean, Armagh were missing probably 3 or 4 lads that would have made an impact to come in. That did have an effect on them, especially in the middle third. I thought they for that middle section, outside of the first 50 minutes, I thought they struggled in the middle third a little bit. But overall, like I think it was a very, very tight game. There was practically nothing between the two of them, but Galway probably did edge it. The one thing I will say about Galway, and looking forward for the Derry game, is I still think they're fighting their natural urges the way they're playing at the moment. They are getting back in numbers, and they are defending really well. And we mentioned John Dibley here at the very first podcast we did, and you can see, I know Cian O'Neill's getting a lot of plaudits, but you can see a bit of grunt in them, especially in their half back line. And when it gets into the close quarters around the D, that they're an aggressive, really tough tackling team. But I'm not sure that's like their natural style of play, and especially when you need let's say your inside forwards working like dogs, especially on kick-out presses and different things like that. I'm not sure it's natural to them, and Shane Walsh is a gorgeous footballer, he's lovely football, almost cost him in the end, but like I'm not sure that's his natural instinct, is to dog in and do that kind of grunt work. And I put it this way, Derry will, and there'll be no problem with Derry getting 15 men behind the ball if they need to at times, if they feel they're under pressure. And maybe that's one thing that Armagh possibly could have done a little bit better. I thought they were too matchup focused at times. So when the pressure was on them, I felt they had their matchups, but they didn't defend as a unit as such. They said, I've got my job done. That's it. Wherever he goes, no problem. And that created space for Finnerty an awful lot, I thought. And especially when it looked like a lot of time he was being picked up by Greg McCabe, and Greg was making a lot of runs down the field, and there was maybe 5 or 6 yards separation in that scoring zone. And I think there was just nearly an overemphasis from Armagh on the matchups, and they just forgot about defending collectively. But in fairness to Galway, I'm probably criticising them a little bit, but their middle 40 minutes or 45 minutes, I thought, were really, really strong. They looked powerful, athletic, but their game management was diabolical in the last few minutes. It really was.
And part of that game management were those high balls that were launched in by Armagh. One of them actually bounced in the 14-yard line, and you're thinking, how can you let a ball like that bounce? Whose responsibility is that? Is it the goalkeeper Gleeson, or is it the full back line? Is it the full back?
I thought it was so far out that someone should have been. I think Sean Kelly was in around it. He probably should have taken control, even put a fist to it, just get some contact on it. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying about them fighting their natural urges. They were trying to game manage. Like I saw when James Morgan got the yellow card, I think Shane Walsh went over and wrestled him to the ground immediately to try and get him the second yellow. And they're trying to do these things. And there was a couple of iffy head injuries and these things, so they're trying to slow the game down as best they can. But then when you have moments like Shane Walsh's crossfield ball, like that things like that, that's what I mean when they're natural. I'll call it flair, but I don't mean it positively. When their flair comes out, it can be a real negative, because even if that ball got across to the far side of the field, the man he was giving it to was in no better position than he was. And it was just a crazy lapse in time, and it was a little bit self-serving. And I think that's not going to cut it against a Derry team who are totally the opposite. I mean, you talk about game management and killing the game, they will go juggler, and then they will just say, right, come and break us down, So I think it's just not natural to Galway, I don't think. And it probably wasn't overly natural to Armagh at times as well. And that's why it was probably such a good contest, So I'm kind of contradicting myself, because it's what made the game so enjoyable, that there's a bit of naivety. But let's talk about the big boys here. It'll be, it's a different story when you get to an All-Ireland final day.
So, Stevie, how do you get through to guys like Shane Walsh with so much ability, but if his game management is like that and he's hitting a crossfield pass in the last minute of the game, what does Padraig Joyce say to him? How do you get these guys to manage the game better?
Well, Joe, before I just talk about that, just to back up what Daniel said there about the goal scoring chances, it mystifies me why so early in the game a player will settle for a point in a situation like that. Take the Jordy O'Burns one. Like, if you pause that, and I actually watched it back on Monday and I paused it, the goal is so on. it's so on. He's got time, he's got space, he's got, I think it was Nugent, Daniel outside him, but there is that opportunity to give the ball, get it back and palm it in, or even a kicking chance for Nugent. But like so early in the game, hunt the goals. Like that's different if it's 17 all with a minute to go, and you want to make sure of putting yourself in front or equalising, whatever happens to be so late in the game. But so early in the game, you're going to get another chance back, that the one that you missed. So like it's risk and reward, and it is more than worth the risk, Joe, particularly in a game, because a goal at that moment, is a big play. But from a game management perspective, Joe, it's analysis. It's analysis. I'm sure that'll be highlighted this week. You go back to the famous story of Dublin, 5 or 6 points up, and I think it was Paul Flynn that told this story. I'm not sure the exact player who told it, but he took a shot with the outside of his foot and sliced it wide. And at that stage, Dublin were showboating with 5 or 6 minutes to go against Mayo. I think it was maybe 2016-17, whenever it was. And Mayo ended up getting a replay. And all week, Jim Gavin's whole video analysis was surrounded around that particular moment of why did he take that shot on. He shouldn't have took it on. He should have took that moment on. So
can I jump in? Can I jump in there for a second, right? So the funny story for you, that particular episode you're talking about was a line ball. I think it was 2016, and I took up a stewarding spot, so I gave my wife Laura and her dad a ticket. So I was a steward on the sideline, and I was right where it was. I think it was on about 21, and Kieran Kilkenny had the ball, and he was looking to go back and forth, and I was from here to the computer away, and Connolly had it in his hands, and he ripped it off him. He had a go, I think, if you remember, and he pulled it to the right. Now the rumor was Connolly had a holiday in Ibiza next week, so they didn't want to replay. But whether that's true or not, I don't know. But that's the exact moment you were talking about, and it was, you can guarantee that was analysed to the nth degree,
Yeah, and that's the only way, Daniel, that players will learn. Like it's okay, Joe, talking about it, but there's no hiding from the camera, So you highlight this moment, you say, right. And if you had actually looked at when Shane Walsh had the ball, he had a player ahead of him who he could have easily have hand passed over the Armagh player's head, who possibly would have been in for a score. He could have soloed even further towards the end line, and come back out and recycled. He had so many options, and yet he tried, the absolute impossible crossfield ball. But then again, that's the Maverick and the type of player he is, and you don't try to stifle that creativity and that influence. But so late in the game, like you're pleading with players then to click in the game management mode, whether it's a call or whether it's a bit of on-field leadership, as Daniel says, from someone, Kieran Kilkenny telling Diarmuid Connolly maybe to knock one out the back there and give it to the next man. But sometimes when you've got that sort of Maverick, off the cuff type player, it's very hard to get through to them. But you can bet your bottom dollar against Derry, they'll need every piece of game management going, Joe.
And Stevie, just to finish off the Armagh there, they used 9 subs, on and off. They really, really went deep into their squad. Even some guys actually had their first sort of senior competitive appearance for Armagh. How did that impact them there in the last sort of 5-10 minutes of extra time?
Well, I don't think it would have had a huge impact, Joe, because for me, it's very straightforward. Like, if a player's named in the match day 26, then he should be considered to be playing. In a county team, in a county squad, like it's different in a club team, Joe. Maybe smaller numbers, smaller club. But in a county like Armagh, the 26 that were named, like for example, Tiernan Kelly wasn't named, who was involved obviously in the incident in the end. I don't know if he was injured or not, but he's a hell of a player, a really good footballer. So if he's not getting into the 26, like they obviously have a lot of quality in that 26. I think Mark Sheed possibly might have been the 26. I didn't see the 26, but like they have some serious quality that didn't make it, Joe. So if you're in the 26, it surely means that you're fit for action and you're fit to come in and make an impact. So I don't think that would have had a major influence in the proceedings, Joe. If anything, it might have give a little bit of freshness in the second period of extra time.
I think just on that story, Joe, I think that might have been one of the influencing factors for that last kick out. That you work so hard on your starting 15, maybe 16 players about how to press a kick out and working zonally or whatever you might do. If you have 4 or 5 lads that are coming in for your debut, no matter what, that's going to be very hard for them to click into that. So I'd imagine that was why it was a call of, right, lads, retreat back a little bit. And maybe that was the only major thing. But as far as I know, there was definitely a couple of injuries. I think Oisin O'Neill was injured as well. He'd featured previously. Tiernan Kelly was injured as far as I know as well, and there was 1 or 2 others. So I think it was all hands to deck for Armagh, I think.
And Daniel, you just mentioned the melee towards the end of full time there. What were your views on that? Obviously, we don't want to spend too long on it, but had you any strong views on that?
The first thing I'd say is, look, there's no condoning that particular action. You know, I straight away say that, and I'm no angel myself, and Stevie's probably seen lots of it over the years. Like, I'm not going to sit in the moral high ground here and pretend I'm a great fella. But look, there's no condoning it shouldn't have happened. Nobody will know better than himself now. Like, he's the one element I don't like is there appears to be a witch hunt online for him, and I saw particular journalists even putting screenshots and using phrases that will incite a bit of hate. And because so many people are watching it, and because the extra time was such a big deal and all the rest of it, there was a lot of people then piling on, and there was people looking for his addresses, looking for work. The disciplinary system will take care of him. There's absolutely no doubt, and they should. But there's an element of fairly high profile people kind of piling on this for benefits of articles, podcasts, talk shows, and I don't think that's right. And I think they're gouging on the rage that is Twitter sometimes, and Stevie will know that better than anyone. But as regards to the row itself, look, I thought at the time, I was like, Jesus, this has absolutely everything. But if it stopped with the players on the field, I think when the extra numbers came in, when Donaghy got involved, when I know McKeever says he was breaking it up, but like when Pádraig Joyce was there, I thought it escalated far too quickly. I can totally understand how. I mean, the energy I felt after Ian O'Neill struck that 70-meter free nearly was unbelievable. I can only imagine what the Armagh players are like. But it needed to, like, without the eye gouge, there was just pushing and shoving, a bit of, I will call it machoism, you know, where they're putting the chest out. But when it escalated, then that's when it was too much. But I think let the GA control, let them sort it out. There'll no doubt be punishment. I'd be a little bit nervous if I was Galway, because if you send people off for contributing to a melee, and if they appeal, they could pick 5 or 6 other lads who contributed, even though it was minimal. So I think the GA will come down extremely hard on it, and rightly so. But like, I thought it definitely, up until the point where it got overly serious, I thought it added massive energy to the whole thing. I thought it was a good watch, let's say, for want of a better word. But as I said, not condoning the final little bit of it at all.
Okay, Stevie, the young lad that done it, you know, he'll get punished. You know, he's made a mistake. I'm sure he'll get punished. I'm sure he'll learn from it. And then, you know, we all move on. These things don't need to be blown out of proportion. And the things, as Daniel said, that are happening on social media, it's ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, Joe. But at the same time, Joe, I think what we need from our national broadcaster, RTE, we need a level of consistency. You know, I go back to Dublin Kerry in the National League, where there's a full-blown melee on the field, in the middle of the field. There's jerseys being pulled off people's backs. There's punches being thrown. There's high digs in around the neck. There's a lot of this neck grabbing goes on nowadays as well. You know, where they're trying to pinch people's airways and stuff like that. You know, more or less a form of choking. And it's not even discussed. It's not even discussed. But there's nearly a whole program dedicated to Tyrone Armagh row. And Joe, I'm going to be bluntly honest here now. In no way do I condone any actions of eye gouging or finger pointing into people's eyes or anything like that, because it's extremely dangerous for someone's sight. But I will say, Joe, here now, it has become blatantly obvious of a huge level of biasness towards northern teams from our national broadcaster RTE, and it's very, very clear as day. Very, very clear as day. I think, you know, when I look back at it and sort of, you know, look at all the incidents that have happened, the coaches that get overanalyzed, like Joe, even my own situation last year, like where, you know, Cantwell goes after me after the Roscommon Galway game. I wasn't even there, Joe. I had COVID at the time and I missed the 2 weeks in the build up to the championship. But for some strange reason, you know, I was name checked about 15 times between the first half and half time, you know. But other coaches that are in the public domain and maybe, you know, have a few mates or a few buddies in the TV studio, you know, they seem to get a free ride and a free ticket. So there's unquestionably, Joe, you know, an anti-northern element there as well to that, you know, everyone's riding on it now, and Colin O'Rourke's coming and calling it thuggery. Kieran Whelan's talking about thuggery. You know, these boys have got to be very careful, because when you lived in a glass house all your life, you know, you have to be careful. You shouldn't be throwing stones, because the same two boys be very well versed in thuggery, you know, during their era of playing and the teams that they were involved in, you know, and particularly that Meath team and particularly that Dublin team that Whelan were involved in. So, you know, I think we've got to be careful. I don't mind, Joe, heavy punishments. I don't mind them, because it has to stop, and it's creeping in at club level. But there has to be an element of consistency. It can't be trial by TV or trial by social media. And people don't realise the influence that the clowns in RTE have on the general public. it's a huge influence on the general population, because even though what they come out with is nonsensical, very few of them have ever coached teams outside of Eamon Fitzmaurice, to be honest with you. But it's influential because people listen to it. It's the national broadcaster. It's the only channel that broadcasts our national games. So therefore, it's very, very influential. Worse, if Sky were covering the game, would it have got the same level of coverage and things like that? Probably not, because they would have focused on what was more important, the game, and what that game brought to as Daniel says, 70,000 people plus those people at home as well, the energy, the atmosphere, the buzz of having 37,000 Armagh fans back in Croke Park, and for me, Joe, it's very plain. It's like there's no one brings more colour or drama or atmosphere to Croker than Ulster teams. And that's the reality of the situation. I think Cork played on the Saturday, and I think that 400 supporters, 400 or something like that, I think it was, madness. Like what was in Croke Park on Saturday? 20,000, 25,000. But yet if Dublin are in the All-Ireland final, you'll have every Tom, Dick and Harry in Dublin looking at a ticket. Do you know what I mean? So it's I think we need to look at it very, very carefully. And obviously, as Daniel says, don't condone those things, but let's have a level of consistency and a little bit of parity. And as for the politics side of things, I remember years ago, my father said to me, he says, one thing anyway, he says, always remember, politics and sport doesn't mix. And it doesn't mix. So whoever she is, I don't even know who she is, but she maybe keep her opinions to herself in future,
Very strong views there. Stevie, Daniel, when we look at that, and Stevie made a point there about, Sky Sports and RTE. As a coach, as a manager yourself, when you see Peter Canavan and Jim McGuinness on Sky Sports, and they're been really analytical, and then you switch over to RTE and there's a different type of focus. Where do you lie with this?
The easiest way for me to describe this, Joe, is my views on watching hurling, right? So I know very little about hurling really in all reality. So if there's a match on Sky or a match on RT, I'll probably go to RT to watch Anthony Daly or whoever having a bit of crack and telling a few stories and that kind of thing. If I go to Sky and look at, I think it's Ollie Canning or James O'Connor, it's much more analytical and probably a little less of that kind of banter, So for something I don't particularly mind about, I have no problem with it. But from a football point of view, again, if I want to see drama, I go to the RTE. If I want to actually see analysis, I go to Sky. And I preferred Saturday's analysis. I preferred the package. I preferred everything that Saturday brought. I think the insights of McGuinness and Canavan are top class. And again, I don't have a northern bias here that because they're from the north that they're excellent analysts, but they really are, and they look kind of deeply at the game. And I just the RT doesn't really appeal to me. I think a couple of exceptions. I thought Oisin McConnell was excellent at the weekend. I thought Colin Boyle was quite good, but some of the older members are just a little bit out of touch. But that's what's required, because you have to look at this. This is about ratings. This is not about fair analysis. This is about who is that person going to reach. And let's say Colin O'Rourke and Pat Spillane, they hit a massive cohort of 50, 60 plus year olds who watch this, who don't necessarily care about kick-out presses. They just want to see flipping commentary. And I think we have to be very cognizant of the fact that this is TV, this is a business, they just want to sell. And that's why, I thought it was funny, the RT were saying we don't want to see those kind of scenes, but the camera was zoomed in for the whole row. If they were really worried about it, switch it off. So look, at the end of the day, it's I won't call it show business, that makes it sound too jazzy, but I think that's where it is for me anyway.
Okay, lads, we'll move on to Mayo v Kerry. Daniel, you mentioned the conversion rate there for Mayo. I think it was around 41%, but Kerry with sort of comfortable enough victory there without ever actually having to play that well. Both teams had to wait for an hour because of the extra time and penalties in the other game. What way did you see that game? Were you disappointed with Mayo, or what went wrong with Mayo? Just before you do answer, obviously, James Horan, we've just received the news that James Horan has stepped down as Mayo manager as well. Were you surprised with that?
No, probably not. I think he'll probably get remembered in a negative kind of context for a lot of it, just because he never got over the line. But I think you have to look at where Mayo were when he took over. It was 2010, they lost to Longford, was it, or something like that, I think, in a qualifier in Pearse Park. And Mayo were at an extremely low ebb, and he has brought them to contenders when, even despite their lack of conversion all those years, and despite own goals, and despite all the hardship and everything else, he has got them to the top table and brought a level of professionalism that they never had before in reality, bar the odd sporadic day here or there. But I think Mayo might get a little reality check when they see who comes in next, and a lot of Mayo supporters were crying out for someone new, but you know, the grass isn't always greener either. Like, so it'll be an interesting year in the next couple of years to see if anything kind of alters there. But also you have to remember Mayo missing their two best forwards. Like, if you take Sean O'Shea and David Clifford out of Kerry, that's a different animal, and that's the reality of Ryan O'Donoghue, Tommy Conroy. Maybe they're not at quite the same level of the two Kerry boys, but it's relatively equivalent, you know. But it's funny. Kerry were there to be shot at, and they're. I said it earlier. Their over elaboration sometimes was it's frustrating, like, because they're lovely kickers. They're lovely. They have all the right skills, but it's like they want to show too much sometimes. Sometimes you just take it down a little level and kind of and just make the simple pass, take the simple score. Mayo were, I thought, really good for 15 minutes after the second half, and they had maybe 5 or 6 wides in a row. And it just drained the energy out of them. Like, if they're even clipping over 3 or 4 of them, all of a sudden it's a really tight game. And every wide was just an energy sapper. And I kind of felt bad for, especially in around the half back line. Like, I thought Lee Keegan, like, Paddy Clifford didn't get a touch of ball. And Lee Keegan did an absolute number on him. You couldn't have asked for anything better. I thought Owen McLaughlin's tackling was incredible. Himself and Darren Moynihan had a massive battle. And I thought that the Mayo looked like a team that need to work a little bit smarter rather than work harder, because they're so tenacious and their tackling is amazing. But every time the ball comes back out after a wide or after a drop short or whatever it might be, those midfielders, halfbacks, cornerbacks must be thinking to themselves, lads, for God's sake, even keep it up that half of the field for 3 or 4 minutes, maybe a couple of phases of play, see can we build something. But it was like they were snapshotting and they were just pulling the trigger too early, and it looked like a little bit of panic was setting in, you know. So Mayo probably were where we thought they were, and the most disappointing aspect for me was that Kerry were so vulnerable to be beaten that Mayo could have really taken that scalp if they were just slightly more clued in, you know. But no, disappointing, yeah, very disappointing for Mayo. But there's no doubt though that the hour and a half, whatever it was, had an impact on the game, because I know myself, when you're up in Croke Park, you have your routine to do, you know. You'll go in and you'll do whatever you do, you the wall inside, you'll do your stretching, you'll do your band work, you'll get your handling right, all of those kind of things. You'll come back in, you'll get your jersey on, you'll get the last bit of fluids on board, all of that kind of stuff, and it's nearly done to the minute in your own routine. And that would have thrown those lads off something fierce. So I think it took the energy out of the crowd, and it took the energy out of both teams as well.
And Stevie, does this cast any doubts for you over Kerry and their ability to make this an All-Ireland, a nailed-on All-Ireland? After you've seen that display, you're bound to have doubts now, are you?
No, I probably don't have doubts, Joe. I just have the same sort of reservations that I've always had about them. You know, as Daniel says, we bit of over elaboration and things like that in their forward line and their forward play, but still feel, Joe, like if you shut down Clifford, you know, you're shutting down an awful lot of their potency and their track and track. Like, I know they've got very, very good players all over the field, and they've got a lot of good, strong lower leg power in their half back line and coming from deep. And obviously with Paddy and Tally in there this year, you know, they're setting up very, very defensively as well, which is making them tougher to play against. But I just feel that if Con O'Callaghan is fit for the semi-final, James McCarthy fit, I think if Dublin are fully fit in the semi-final, I think Dublin will beat them, Joe. And I think Dublin will beat them on the basis that Dublin will just keep things so methodically simple. It'll be structure, it'll be simple, you know, and at that stage, simple is special, you know, and I just feel, yes, there's goals in Kerry, there's scores in Kerry, but Dublin have that sort of destructive defensive that they can really, really shut that Kerry team down. I fancy Dublin to beat them, Joe, in the semi-final.
Okay, that's very interesting. Moving on, Stevie, to the Derry-Clare game. That was a scintillating display there from Derry. You know, we know the opposition weren't Dublin or Kerry, but how good were Derry?
Well, Joe, I think maybe, you know, without getting carried away, I'm sure Rory Gallagher will want to put a lid on things. Like, Derry did beat Clare by 11 points in the league. I think it was 11 points in the league in the National League earlier in the year. So probably from a Derry perspective, they'll not be getting ahead of themselves either, Joe, because it's a team that they were obviously expected to beat. I think Roscommon will probably be the sickest team over the weekend, having watched Clare getting dismantled so easily against Derry, and they'll probably have looked at that game thinking that was a game that they possibly could have beaten Derry and to get to an All-Ireland semi-final, because for them, the semi-final of the All-Ireland is sort of the glass ceiling for them. So I would say they'd be very disappointed with the manner in which they collapsed against Clare. And I think it was more, Joe, Roscommon collapsing rather than Clare winning that game in the in the last 12, because I don't think anyone could actually believe what was happening, Joe, so late in the game. So I think Clare were in bonus territory. Daniel obviously has close links to the Clare camp, with a few friends in the squad as well, and might know a little bit more about what their goals and aims were at the start of the year. But they just looked like a team that were nearly, Joe, happy to be in the last eight, and look, I'm sure they're a proud bunch of men, and Colin Collins is a very, very astute manager, and I'm sure they harboured sort of beliefs that they could beat Derry. But I just think Derry smelt a really huge opportunity there, Joe. Real huge opportunity. Started the game with so much intent. This nonsensical theory that they can't play that system in Croke Park. Like Dublin and Kerry have been playing that system in Croke Park now for 5 or 6 years. So, getting bodies back and breaking from deep and transition, and that's been the standout difference in Dublin over most teams during their time of winning 5-6 in a row, with their ability, Joe, to get numbers ahead of the ball, to get high, to get depth in their attack. And that's something that Derry have brought in this year. And it's not something that's overly innovative and overly new. It's just something that has just become, so entrenched in them because of their level of physical conditioning, that they're able to do it now, Joe, so repetitively. And I think that's been a big plus for Derry. They got a head start over a lot of teams in lockdown. They were training obviously behind closed doors quite a large proportion of the time during lockdown, and that's obviously given them a real head start, Joe, from a conditioning perspective. And they built on that during Rory Gallagher's time. So for me, it was no big shock, and I really feel that if Derry can just sort out the little small tweaks in their kick-out strategy, I don't think they'll be far away, Joe.
And Daniel, Colin Collins there, even though Clare have done really well to get this far, I'm sure he was disappointed after the final whistle, especially to concede those 5 goals, and they didn't really perform, probably didn't justify themselves as well as they could have.
No, and I think they probably weren't let to a certain degree. I think they would have tried to do everything that they normally would have done. They would have tried to bring intensity. They would have tried to match Derry as much as they possibly could, but they just weren't let. They weren't let, and probably again we go back to little margins, but the first maybe 5 or 6 minutes, both teams had a couple of wides. It was a little bit cagey. Derry nipped on a point. Clare actually had missed a couple of fairly okay chances, and I say they've been happy enough after 7 or 8 minutes, and then just your goalkeeper and a kick out. That's a giveaway goal. That is a handover goal, and that's not. Yeah, there was a little bit of pressure, but I expect my keeper to be able to chip that to a fairly open midfielder all day. And all of a sudden, you're 1-1 to no score. The Derry crowd is rapturous. Then you're chasing. And Clare needed a day where they never chased. They needed a day where they could be solid, where they, similar to the Roscommon game more or less, where they were pretty much in control for the majority of the game. But it just never materialised. And once, as Stevie said, once Derry smelled blood, they just went after him. And look, I think, to be honest with you, I think Derry would have ripped Roscommon apart as well.
Okay, we seem to have a few sound problems with Daniel there at the minute. Stevie, just going back there a little bit to Derry, is there anything Derry need to do in training to even bring their game to a new level or another level against Galway? Because I'm not saying they're the finished article or anything like that, but what do they need to do in training over the next few weeks? Does it continue the same game plan they have, or do they need to add anything new or different?
No, well, listen, Joe. At the end of the day, they're a very, very well-oiled machine. I said to a couple of friends of mine there the other evening, I says they're a team that are in such harmony with their manager and their game plan. Everyone's singing the same hymn sheet. There's no egos within the squad. There's no show ponies. Everyone's putting their shoulder to the wheel. Everyone's playing to a system, to a structure. The roles are very clear, as Daniel pointed out as well. A few little sort of tweaky matchups as well. Brendan Rodgers even got on to Murphy in the Ulster final and putting Murphy on the back foot, and the same again on Saturday past against Clare, by by putting the Clare midfield in the back foot. And, you know, Rory Gallagher's a very astute coach, Joe, a very, very astute manager. He studies the game very, very deeply. He'll have done a huge amount of homework on this Galway team. We don't know what's coming down the line for Galway as well from a suspension point of view. They may lose one or two players for that game. So obviously that will have an impact into the game itself. But Derry are probably in a very, very good place, Joe. A really good place in the fact that they could sit back on Sunday, watch that game, you know, look at Gleeson. I think they'll go after Gleeson something serious. I really think they'll go after him hard and heavy. I think they've got enough strength and physicality around that middle third, particularly the likes of Glass and Emmett Bradley and guys like that, to compete with McDade and Conroy and Tierney. So I think you'll find Derry, Joe, particularly early in this game, going after the Galway kickout. And what Derry will look to do early in this game is get in front, because Galway play a very counter-attacking style of football as well. They like to sit deep. They like to mark zonally. They like to sit with a deep line of zonal defence. If Derry can get in front, what you'll find, Joe, then is that Derry will sit in, and Derry will probably pick holes off in Galway. The longer the game goes on, they'll look then to pick the holes off in Galway and make Galway look like cannon fodder. But look, it's going to be an intriguing game. I think both semi-finals, we're now at a level where both games are probably going to be really tight, really enjoyable, you know, really intriguing. They're two games to really look forward to. Probably looking back on the quarterfinals, Joe, a lot of talk about the Tailteann Cup this year and tiers, football, etc., etc. But if we're going to be realistic, Joe, you know, there probably is a top 3 or 4 in the country, and the rest are a long way behind, in my opinion, you know, and it's been like that for a while, Joe. When you look at the average margin of wins, like Dublin won by 12, was it, or 11? You know, Derry 12, Kerry won by 8 or 9, you know, and non-events, you know. So if you're talking about tiers and competitions, you could conceivably have 3 or 4.
We look towards the semi-finals, and Stevie, I want you to get off the fence here with Galway Derry. Who do you think will win that game?
Joe, I just think at this stage here now, I think you know, Derry have so much more clarity in what they're doing, in my opinion. I still think Galway, as much as they've sort of got a bit more steely defensively under the likes of John Devlin and that, I just feel, Joe, they still have, you know, just too many mavericks, you know, too many players that will do their own thing. You know, obviously people complain about the game being very systematic and you know, and sterile and things like that as well. But at the end of the day, Derry don't really care about what other people think. And, you know, they're a team that are very much in harmony with everything their managers asked them to do. They've got serious momentum, Joe. There's a serious buzz around the county as well. You know, everyone is behind them at this stage. It's been so long since Derry have been, you know, within a huge opportunity of getting an All-Ireland final. You know, so for me, I just think this chance is just not going to bypass Derry. I really don't. I think it's going to be a Derry and Dublin final.
What do you think, Daniel?
Yeah, I'd be kind of leaning towards the same, but with the Kerry Dublin game, it all depends on who's fit and available. And I know that's a bit of a cop out, but if Conor Callahan's back, I would say Dublin. If he's out, I think Kerry could pip it. I think Derry have too many strings to their bow. I think they can give it to you any way you want it. You know, whether that's we can shut it down and have a tough watch, or we can play open stuff. And even I think the emotional energy from Galway after the weekend, it was such a massive occasion. It'll be very hard to kind of get it back down a bit and rebuild again. So I'd probably say Derry will beat Galway, and the other one, injuries to determine.
And lads, just to finish off the Tailteann Cup final, it's been played before the Galway Derry game on July the 9th. I think both of you actually tipped Cavan, am I right, at the outset?
I think so, yeah. I'd say him anyway.
You still stand with that, obviously, yeah?
Well, listen, Joe, you know, Cavan are a you know, they're a side who honestly probably really and truly, like, you know, are probably better than some of the teams that were in the All Ireland series, Joe. You know, you had the likes of obviously Louth and Limerick and Sizey. We don't no disrespect to those teams, but Cavan have a better group of players there, and yes, they seem to have embraced the Tailteann Cup, and it might give them a bit of a buzz and a bit of a lift. I still, Joe, have huge reservations about the competition. I really, really do. I'm not convinced on it. I think there's been an awful lot of drubbings handed out in it as well. Cavan beat down by 12 points. Cavan Sligo was quite entertaining. Westmeath awfully semi-final, pathetic. It was such shocking standard of football. So, in an empty Crow Park, let's be honest, despite the fact they tried to jazz it up by squeezing everyone into the lower Hogan and making sure the camera was on that, but no, I just feel at the weekend, it'll probably be a decent enough game, but it's not something or competition, Joe, that really whets my appetite, to be honest with you. But if I've tipped Cavan, I'll probably stick with Cavan just to edge it this weekend.
And Daniel, you're still with Cavan, but you're more positive about the competition, aren't you?
Yeah, I'd give it a couple of years. I still think it needs a little bit of time to bed in. The only fear that I have for the 20s are a lot of the main players will be playing. I wonder will the GA back that up, if they will. But look, a couple of years time we'll see. From the point of view of the game, I actually liked a lot of what Westmeath did the last day. I thought they played with a lot of aggression, and they still conceded. I can't remember, it was 216 maybe or something like that they conceded, which is a little bit too much to an awfully team they were much better than. But I'd say it'll be a decent enough contest, because you probably have the two best teams in it, I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, lads. Well, thanks for coming on. I think both of you have training tonight. Daniel, you're probably going to get your Wi-Fi fixed there, and Stevie, you'll probably be deleting a few of your tweets. But
Joe, I was always told by never say anything to anybody or never put anything on social media that you wouldn't say to someone's face. So I'll say the exact same thing if I meet those people from RTE.
Okay, lads. Thanks for coming on, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.